welcome to our COVID-19, a tactical approach to HR and finance webinar. You all participants are part of a leading edge for BOMA. This is our first webinar that we've ever done. So thank you for participating, both to the panelists and to the attendees. We have muted all of the attendees just to make sure that there's not a lot of background noise. If you do have any questions, please use the question and answer feature that is part of Zoom, and we'll be answering those questions at the end when we've got a Q&A session. And as I mentioned, we are recording this. I'll introduce each of the speakers very briefly, and then we're just gonna get into having a conversation. So first I'll introduce Sean Ingraham. He's a Vice President of Community Development at First Service Residential. We've also got Dax Sardinha, Director of Talent Acquisition with QuadReal Property Group. And then our co-host today, we've got Michael Scott, Vice President, Building Division with Impact Recruitment. So these gentlemen bring a lot of experience and expertise when it comes to HR and finance issues. And so we're just going to jump in and get started. So I'll just kick things off by noting that obviously we've all had to look at transitioning our work remotely. And I guess the question I would ask the panelists first is, how do you support those people managers when they're trying to manage teams remotely? It's something that's very challenging and certainly very different. Maybe we can start with you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks to BOMA BC for putting this on, and looking forward to this conversation with both Sean and Dax and Damian all wearing in. So a couple of the other webinars that I have been on over the last couple of weeks very much focused on the change that we've all had to come to grips with in such a short period of time. And in a few of them, the focus was very much on how did the employees or our employees kind of feel, what are they going through, and how do we continue as a business to ensure that they are comfortable with their new working situations and surrounds, but also comfortable with being able to still give the most that they want to, and making a strong assumption, a good assumption here that everybody wants to continue to give their 110% for all of our respective companies. And it's important to remember that most of those employees come at it from a position of fear, right? Fear of the unknown, fear for themselves, about what's going to happen with their job, fear for their friends, family, all those close to them. As we have rolled through the last 6 weeks, and I think for most of us, we've kind of been in this work from home situation for about 5 to 7 weeks. We spend more time now going through an initial triage session and now looking at it from a business standpoint. And the businesses also, as employers, we have fears. How have we dealt with things? What have we put in place that has worked? What have we put in place that has not worked? And how are we going to roll forward into the next 3 to 6 weeks about getting people back into our more normalized, I won't say normal, but more normalized work situations. Big things for me as Impact Recruitment, we have just shy of 70 employees working from the one downtown office who had to very quickly get repatriated out to their various locations. Key points for me are the clarity and frequency of communication. And the communication that I speak of is not just working with an employee from a day-to-day standpoint, but communicating the trials and difficulties that the company, the employer, is also going through. We've had a multitude of federal, provincial, financial programs that have been put in place or been spoken about. And even to this point, we get April 27 as being the final application date for wage subsidy program. But 3 weeks ago, that was just, we believe it's going to happen, we don't even know. And that communication back out to your employee groups was important for people to have. and making sure that they understood clearly that we as an organization were there in it with them, obviously, but also not looking to make layoffs, but looking to actually make sure we can do the best out of this situation. And that bled into a message and a purpose for each individual. But I kind of would mind handing over to Sean and Dax to get what your thoughts are on clarity and frequency of communication in the early days, call it 3 weeks or so ago.
Sure, I'll jump in if that works.
Yeah.
So we've got 204 in our office in BC in 200 Granville, and then we've got 250 associates like cleaners, building managers out in the field. And so we've had some success with communication, but really when we look at the government, we think they've done a really good job. So we look at like Trudeau and Dr. Bonnie Henry, our local rock star, and their messaging is consistent, and their messaging is very clear and it's organized. And so we have made a concerted effort to emulate that. So we have an exec call every morning, the 6 of us on the exec team, making sure that all our talking points and what we're addressing is all standard, and we're all saying the same thing, which I think is helps our team feel secure, but also remove any confusion or as much as you can. And then we have something called First Call, which is we have all of our associates join twice a week on an open call. We have our president address all our team, and then we have open forum, and we have questions, and the questions are amazing. Some of them we don't expect them, or we don't have the answers right there and then, and we circle back with the team. But there's been a really good learning experience for us on what's important to our people, but also just answer questions as openly and freely as we can. Just to make sure everybody, again, feels more comfortable in the communications there. And then as far as communication, I think other streams, multi-channel, you can't just send an email. People are inundated with them. So we do multi-channels for communicating, just to make sure everybody, again, is on the same page. So we've really seen that success as far as communicating with our frontline, especially.
Yeah, to Sean and Michael's point, there's no such thing as over communication right now. And going back 3 weeks, it was the same thing. We needed to make sure that our teams heard from leadership, and HR played a lot of guidance in that, right? You ask a leader to say something and they're happy to do so, but they didn't necessarily know what to say. So a lot of that communication, that early messaging, how are we doing as an organization? We have about 60% of our organization are frontline workers, right? Out of a company of 1,100 people, that's quite a few that are up against customers, that are up against, that are in the community every day. So we wanted them to know that, we had their back, that, we were thinking of them. This is how we are doing as an organization, where our strategies were. And to Sean's point, it was a multi-tiered communication step. It wasn't just emails. We helped with our senior leaders actually having a weekly video. So each one of our C-suite members have a video. We're on week 6 now, believe it or not, of all the videos. And they've been very well received. And it's, again, just a snippet. It's very, the feedback we've got is very humanizing for people, that they had no idea, that, someone was able to provide that type of a message. But at the end of the day, it's all about communicating and making sure that they have the tools and the people that have the tools necessary. We created our own SharePoint site for our internals as well. We were just throwing more and more resources that's driven by HR. We call it the Corona Zone. It's not trademarked, so feel free to use that name if you like it. We also set up a dedicated email address for individuals that if they want to respond semi-anonymously and want to get information, or just want to let us know how they're feeling, they can do that as well, and we can reach out to them. So it's all about the communication at this point.
Mm-hmm. That picking up on that point there, Dax, having the message, number one, the message has to be consistent, right? From the business, it's really important that you make sure that's a consistent message, and that's whether you're a small business or a large organization. But then once you've achieved that consistency in whatever tools you have to make sure that the levels of management are on board with the same page, from there, it's important to make sure that you have different levels of management speaking out to the employee group as a whole, right? Because Yeah, not everybody is going to want to hear from the CEO or the president every single time, nor the VPs, but people have different levels of respect and connection to line managers at different levels as well, right? So if you can do that very, very well, then you've achieved already a different voice, and then, as Sean said, a different medium of communication that's speaking. And in those early days, it was all about finding out what is the best way to communicate with everybody. It's not a blanket approach. And one of the things that I did and we did at Impact Recruitment is after that first 7 to 10 days, when we'd established basic processes and timelines for communication, then it was time to weigh back into each individual within your particular area or team, if you could do that, and say, so now we've done this for 5 or 7 business days. What is it like for you? And how is this working for you? And do I need to dial back in terms of my communication to you while making sure that you don't feel like you're left out in the cold? Or do you need me to ramp it up? And it was really interesting as to which, the percentages that said, I want more, whereas I felt that we were doing more. Most of us working 12-hour days these days, given this new format of trying to work. But there was also a healthy percentage that went, no, what you've given us is great. That gives me a solid base to now understand what I've got to do and how I'm going to do it, and then move forward from there. So that was a good thing.
Yeah, it's great, Michael. If you can have that kind of a feedback mechanism, I think that's key, right? One of the things that one of my colleagues had mentioned is that engagement right now, believe it or not, is the highest it's ever been through our social media sites for our teams. It's, people are using the opportunities to provide that feedback. So if you can, definitely enable them to do so.
So it's a great question to segue into. How do you keep teams engaged when you're working remotely? It's difficult. It's not the same as being able to walk through the office or have those conversations face to face with people. Can you talk a little bit about that, Doc?
Yeah, so we've come up with a couple of different strategies, and we have both a work and a social strategy. And the reason why I separate the two is, it's one thing to have your regular one-on-one and you're having that conversation with your employees. That's one thing, but people need to go beyond that. People need to be going beyond just having that one-on-one conversation, especially where we may have individuals or employees that are living alone, right? They are by themselves or in an apartment, and that one person is not going to be enough. So we also include team orientation, and then we have the larger teams, the broader teams, where we have, we have a social Friday, as we like to call it, or happy hour Fridays, where the groups from across Canada come together and they virtually just share a cocktail. For those in BC, if it's too early for a cocktail, they may have a coffee or tea or a pastry. But I'll tell you one thing, those of us in Ontario, we're definitely having some type of alcohol. And again, we just enjoy each other's company, and it's a free-for-all, and there's not a structure to those types of calls. So I think it's important from an engagement perspective, Damian, to answer your question, is to make sure that people have the different types of outlets, right? It can't just be all about work. And even more so, it's important for those managers to provide that feedback to those employees that, it's not a 9-to-5 job anymore, right? It's not your standard work environment anymore. You have to go beyond and work differently, right? And if you need a break partway through the day, that's okay for you to have that break throughout the day. For parents at home, those that are dealing with kids, homeschooling, my family, my wife and I are doing that with our 6-year-old. You got to block time out, and it is a different work environment. So to keep that engagement, you just have to have them understand that yes, it's we need things still to get done, but it's not about the amount of hours you're putting into it. It's about getting those outcomes, right? So it's not about the task; it's the outcome itself.
Yeah, the outcome is so important. Sorry to jump in there, and I'm going to hand this over to you, Sean. Actually, for a company like Impact Recruitment, where we all predominantly, in our individual divisions, perform the same function. So we have that sort of homogeneity of challenges that we face. But wanted to ask you, Sean, when you've got individual buildings, residential and commercial, and specific teams that work on those, how have you incorporated something like what Dax was talking about into your working environment, workplace?
Yeah. So Dax, I want to go to the fun route first. So I agree. I think you need to have that social, because when you're walking around the office or you're spending more time with each other, you do get that chance to socialize. So sometimes you need to incubate that a little bit and start it and be the catalyst for it. So we've got a really great contest going on right now, and it's song titles that are related to the current situation. So like, my example is "Get Back" by the Beatles, or and so we've had hundreds of submissions, and it's just it's been such a good success for us, for everybody to be part of something, and make it create that extra, that informal network in a different way. The as far as the delivery, and you're definitely right, working from home is different. So that first call I was talking about, part of it is we tour our home office, or our home, or where we're working from. So whether it's the living room or wherever it is. So I'm up tomorrow, and so I'm going to show off my basement, which I've been relegated to because of
and doing a big clean today, no doubt.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. But really, we're focused on mindset, and so our mindset, and we challenge each other on it when we don't have that mindset, is that it doesn't matter about the pandemic right now. We have a delivery of service that we've promised our clients, and we need to deliver that. And however we do that, that's okay. If you need to take off some time in the morning, that's okay. And so sometimes you do need to exercise, just because you're at home all the time. You need to go for a walk or whatever it is. So that's okay, as long as we're delivering to our clients and we're not using it as an excuse on why something didn't happen or couldn't happen. And I think that's really key, is getting in that mindset, because some people are just blaming it on everything, even if it's applicable or not. And I think we need to get away from that.
Yeah.
That is that mindset. And then, like I said, each of our organizations and all of the organizations out there have a service that they've been known to do well, and that's what's brought you success. So how do you continue to move that? Just this morning, I was talking about that changing routine of, yes, so now we're working within the organization and talking about how we work, but we all have external points of communication, vendors, providers, etc. And their working patterns have changed as well, right? So now you've actually thrown that in, and you have an even steeper learning curve about where you work it. One of the messages I put to my team today was based around trust, tenure, understanding how we all work, accountability to each other. But exactly that point, we have a group of people that love to be outdoors, physically active, and I'm okay. It's important for them to know, even though they already know this, but it's one of those repetitious things about communication, is it's okay if it means that you're doing your lunch way earlier or later in the day, or you've got to go off and maybe clean your basement because something's happening, but you have something else that's scheduled for 7 o'clock in the evening, and that's what works for you. That's totally fine, right? That's what people have to understand. And I'd be keen to link that back into a future topic on this webinar of what does that landscape look like moving forward. But, Dax, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I would say, from where the landscape is moving forward is, well, I'll answer that one in a second, but I agree. I think again, you need to be mindful of what are your outcomes, what are you trying to achieve. Back to Sean's point, we've got individuals that are frontline workers that we want to keep engaged as well, and engagement means something different for everybody, right? One of my colleagues, she started a program for our internship program where there's challenges, right? So weekly challenges, and we've got the people managers involved. And it could be something as simple as a scavenger hunt, or draw a picture of your team, and you get these great creative pieces that come out of that, and it just shows, and then when people see what other teams have done, they want to jump in, they want to do it as well. So it's a great snowball effect, if I can say it that way, around how people are engaged. But where I think where we're going to answer that question as well, Michael, is it's not going to be business as usual at the end of the day, right? Once everything starts to settle back down, once people start having the ability to travel more and to be back in the office, it's not going to be 100% back in the office. It's going to be, in a lot of cases, a staggered start. I know there's groups that are talking about having teams, right? So if you have an HR team, you have a team 1 and a team 2. An HR team 1 goes in there in the office for a week, And then there's a deep clean, and then HR team 2 goes in for a week. So I know there's different strategies that people are going to be deploying, but it is definitely going to be a slow start. I think people need to prepare for that slow start, or being mindful of that slow start back in the office. And again, you have to take into account that there's going to be different family dynamics where, there's camps are going to be canceled, right? Where kids are not going to have the daycare availability and both parents work. So what does that look like? So I think people managers and organizations need to be mindful of not just their corporate strategy, but also the individual worker strategy, and what does that mean for them. And you need to have options. And again, I'd be very surprised if by the end of this year that 50% of the people are back in the office on a regular basis. I think we'll get back to a bit more of the norm, or closer to that 100% in 2021. But I think for the later half of this year, it's going to be a staggered start in.
Yeah. What are you thinking, Sean?
Yeah, so I agree. We call it the new normal. That's our internal thing. We're in the new normal. I don't know if we'll ever go back to where we were. I think that this is the silver lining on this, is that it's proven that working from home can work. That you don't need to be in the office. It's forced us to innovate in new ways that we've maybe not prioritized before. And so I think we will never go back to the way we were. We're definitely going to return to some offices and things, but when you think about it, when we pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in parking every year,
Right.
there's opportunities there on how we return. And so I think that there is going to be a new normal for us, and we don't know what that's going to be, but we're looking forward to some of the innovations that we had to make, seeing the fruits of that down the road.
If I can piggyback on that, Sean, I think some of those things, those innovations, may not be rocket science or may not be mind blowing, but how hiring managers are interacting with candidates is a great example of doing things differently. That hiring managers that would have sworn up and down that they had to sit down with that person and breathe the same air of the individual before they can make a decision, have realized now that no, they can actually get quite a bit through video calling, and they still get that body language, they still get that interaction, they still get that connection with that person to make those decisions. I think again, looking at transferable skills right now is a good example of where areas may be a bit slower. So, for example, our development group is a bit slower right now. We're not needed to doing any development. So we're looking at how do we transfer some of those skills, those capabilities, into other areas that are needed. Accounting is a great example, right? You could be an accountant on the development team. Well, you know what? We may need you on the corporate side now, right, to help out on the workload. So I think the flexibility, to your point, Sean, I think some of those aha moments that organizations have come out of all of this, the flexibility has really risen, and people are now looking at excuse the overused term of agility within the organization, and how to have those transferable skills. Are they more open to it in ways that they've never been before?
And you raised some really good points there, Dax, and I'm curious, how do you keep recruiting, or are you still recruiting in this kind of virtual remote work environment?
Yeah, so we are. We're still actively hiring. We're still actively looking in the marketplace, and I think there's two pools to that. Number one, I think there is your immediate need, right? So you are having those virtual conversations. I would say recruiters, for the most part, talent acquisition specialists, for the most part, are used to working virtually. I'm sure Michael and Sean can attest to that. Their teams can support hiring pretty much anywhere in the world if need be. As long as they understand the market. But I think that leveraging technology is key right now. Whether it's using Skype or other video tools is key to help bridge the gap between not being able to actually see the person. And there's benefits that come out of that, of course. You can record interviews in ways that people haven't been open to doing before. But I would say there's the other piece, which is being proactive as well, is understanding what is the landscape, right? When you're busy and you're constantly moving forward. And again, I'm sure Michael and Sean can attest to this, that talent acquisitions doesn't slow down, or has never really slowed down until now. So we get that extra breather, if you will, to look and say, well, what's going on in the market? Who are the big players? Who are the individuals that we should actually be looking at for future opportunities, not necessarily right now? And having those conversations, those proactive conversations with that passive candidate pool, that you really don't get a chance to do on the day-to-day because you're just drinking from the fire hose.
That's true. I'll sort of weigh in on that one. Absolutely, the recruitment aspect of things has continued to move forward. There are definitely some areas that have required a step back and a rethink of how you actually work your organization to the next level of success that you've always believed that it was destined for. One of the biggest challenges that we face right now at Impact, and many of our competitors as well, is yes, a lot of the clients, and especially I'll speak to the property management world, are looking at this opportunity now to say, okay, we can actually take the step upwards in terms of the talented people that we have in the organization, right? From a recruitment company standpoint, a lot of those top talent are still not necessarily putting their resumes out there because they've already got a job, right? So, they will refer back to their traditional networks within the industry and within their recruitment partners that they worked with before. But we still have to talk about now, and this is a great conversation. It started to happen. So again, we go back to what the first of this 6 weeks, the first 3 weeks was all about triaging the situation to get through it and work out how you move forward. In the last 2 to 3 weeks, now you've actually had businesses actually start making business decisions again. And those business decisions are already looking at what happens in June, July, and August. So we're looking at, the next 3 months ahead. And from a hiring standpoint, is saying, to Dax's point, I'm sure Sean's going to weigh in this as well, is if I now have an available group of people that we proactively met with, and a lot of our clients are doing that right now, the concern is, what is the go live date for that individual? Can it be a specific start date in May? Does it have to be a floating start date that happens in June? And those are valid discussions, right? Because now you're planning your business out as to what happens. Maybe sometimes it's even July, right? Some of the properties that we're all involved in on the commercial side, they're still coming to, near completion. However, you've got to do that transition between the construction phase, completion of a property, and into the actual building and facilities management and leasing it out, right? So these are all areas that do come in, and they're good conversations. Those conversations in the last week for my team has just ramped up severely. Sean, your thought on that?
So some industries are suffering. There's no two ways about it. If you're in retail right now, it's challenging. We're seeing really good candidates come from other industries, and we're opening to hiring the best person, regardless of if they've got a history specifically in the industry, because we can train that. And so we're seeing really good applicants. Typically, we just had a job filled. We'd see 2, maybe 3 qualified candidates go to the final interview process. We got 9 on this project. And so we're really seeing really good quality people come from other industries as they're looking for maybe more security in our industries, more secure, but also just that they probably don't have a job at a level they wanted to return to that industry. So, my heart goes out to those other industries, but at the same time for us, it's been really, we're in a really good position as far as hiring. And so as we grow and we advance, it's looking good for us. So I think though the industry has to focus on, you don't need to have 20 years of building manager experience or property manager experience. So what you need to do is have the right person that you can train and give them those if they have the base skills already.
Yeah, if I could just jump in and add to that, Sean, I think, the key thing is also, how do you onboard now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for those of us that are still hiring, that are still bringing people on, we've focused and built out a virtual onboarding program for our people managers to make sure that people are still getting a good experience. And it doesn't work everywhere, right? You can't virtually onboard a building manager, right? It just, they have to be in the building. You have to know where the chillers are. Like, they have to be there. So you have to be very mindful of the types of roles you're going to bring on right now from a business perspective to make sure that they're being set up for success at the end of the day. And if you're not doing that, that's going back to, Michael, your point of, you have to weigh, is this the right time? Can you postpone it for a couple of months? Good talent, most talent is not going anywhere right now. They are looking, they are open. But if you've had great conversations and that person is engaged and interested in your organization, if you do need to postpone, it makes sense to give them that better opportunity for performance and success at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
One thing we talked about as part of the prep was the role that corporate culture plays right now, and how companies are responding to this situation and how they're treating their employees. I'd love to hear your perspectives on that. Michael?
Sorry, that cut out for a second there, Damian.
That's all right. So we talked about the role that corporate culture is playing now and how companies are treating their employees in the current situation and what impact that might have then in terms of, you know, recruiting, retaining, all of those elements.
Yeah, you know, part of that retention for us, I'll speak about impact. It goes back to something about what Dax was mentioned before, and that is the repurposing of individuals within the division. And again, as a consistent message, if you are going to go down that path, because you have a number of different choices still available right now. None of us want to be in that layoff situation. So you go to a, you know, kind of repurpose someone to a different division. Yes, and you communicate that that's what you're doing openly to the entire company. If you did end up in a situation where you've got to look at maybe a temporary layoff, then that's a different message to convey, but it needs to be clear and concise. But the important part about this is the branding of how you're doing that. I think that if you chose to put somebody who has transferable skills into a different department, one of the big benefits for that individual is making sure that they're given a say in how they will contribute to that new area of the company. So you're being inclusive in that sense, but also making sure that the individuals within your organization, knowing them well enough to say, what opportunity can I give you right now that will add to rounding out of your skills in your specific sector or niche? That's really, really important. Tying back into what we were just talking about floating start dates and onboarding, that's also very, very important. If you can create a structure, and at Impact, we're actually, and my marketing team might kill me, but I think we're launching either tomorrow or Friday a very specific onboarding package for all clients as to how to actually manage that. And you're attending to what is a very gray area to begin with in a very, very concrete manner. And that makes sure that people you brought on board are immediately bought into how you're doing things. And then the people that they're working with, your longer term employees, see what you as a company have actually done. So it all leads into that overall employer branding and how you're promoting yourself to be doing the best you possibly can right now. Dax and Sean.
Yeah, I have to agree. What we're seeing right now is employees are very focused on how their employers are treating them. And they're looking what other companies are doing. I mean, let's not pretend that they're not looking at what everybody else is doing in their space. And if they see one company that is, you know, treating their employees very, very well, and they're not feeling the same type of love, if I can say it that way, then they may be open to being that more of a passive candidate and turning into more of an active candidate in the marketplace, and you may lose them. So how you wrap your arms around the people, again, going back to the very first comments around the communication, you know, you communicate honestly, openly, as transparently as you can to the situation that you're in. And you have to treat your employees well, and you have to make sure that they understand that you know, why you're doing what you're doing. If you are looking at, you know, transitional skills or transferable skills and moving from one group to another, what's in it for them, right? They're getting that cross-functional skill. They have to understand what's in it for them, that you're not just playing a shell game, that you're actually helping not only keeping them employed, but you're actually giving them greater skills or different skills or opportunity to focus in a different area, or different internal connections. Even something as a different mentor or different connection goes a long way, and we can't lose sight of that. But it is very much being looked at across the scope, across the market, on how people are being treated right now.
Yeah, Sean?
Yeah, so I'm going to address the harder one. So we repurposed some staff as best we can, but definitely we had some of our office staff where we had to temporarily lay them off. And I think how they're still valued staff. It's just that their function isn't there now. And if they couldn't be repurposed into something else, I agree. It's how we treat them, but also how we communicate with them. I just went through a bunch of ours yesterday. I called them just to have that human touch. We set them up with First Service University, which is our online training platform, so that they can get some skill sets. And maybe if it's not, they're not compelled to, but you know, if they're at home and looking for something to do, it's something there. And then we covered things like their benefits costs, just so that they don't have that extra burden, and they still have benefits during this time. But I think the key thing is, as Dax said, it's you got to be super transparent as best as you can, just to let them know. So but make sure they feel valued, because they are valuable team members. It's just the unfortunate circumstances that are temporary. I really applaud our HR and all HR right now, because it is now a one-on-one flexible situation with every associate. And so it's no longer the type where you could just have a blanket statement and it would apply to everybody. It really is an individual one-on-one evaluation of where that person's at and what we can how we can best serve them and help them. And I know our HR team's just working absolutely flat out with them, and so I applaud them on that. One thing they did do is we do have to onboard some people. So some positions, like Doug said, you just can't onboard because virtually you can't do a building manager. It's just not possible. But you can do like office staff, you can virtually onboard them. So we had a pre-meeting for this webinar last week, and I said, I'm not deep in this because we're just inventing it. So we did get it. We got it across the line, and no longer had we just got it across the line. Our HR team's doing an interview tomorrow for an HR focus site on what that looks like. And I think that's a key thing, is that virtual onboarding is going to be really important. And I think in the HR world, that's going to be a big advancement in the coming weeks.
So Sean, you talked about, unfortunately having to let some people go. I would love to take a bit more of a practical turn here. And how do you keep buildings or properties running when you've got reduced staff, possibly reduced hours, even if you've been able to minimize layoffs? And then how do you deal with then the additional workload that falls on the shoulders of those people who are still available?
Yeah, so we had less than 5% of our office staff, and then only one or two cited associates. And they're in very particular situations. So like if there's an amenity building that was completely closed down, and then there was somebody that managed that amenity area, the building's doesn't need active management. So internally it was like reception. So, we have a group of reception, and there's nothing to receive because we closed our office and moved all of our inbound calls to a customer care center. So it's more of those roles. And so there hasn't been a significant workload put on others in our situation. I'm sure others have had that though.
Yeah, Dax, how about you?
Yeah, we've been lucky as well. Quite fortunate that our frontline staff are doing well. I would say those those rare instances where we have had someone who is sick and unable to work, or just doesn't feel comfortable and safe, and we respect that. We've looked at other areas. Sean mentioned retail is slow right now, right? So we may not need two different maintenance technicians of different levels supporting that building. We may be able to pull from one area into more of our residential space if need be. So again, the flexibility of the front line and their openness to supporting across the board, knowing that we're all in it together, and it's about the communities that we serve at the end of the day, that we want to make sure that those communities continue to be engaged and have what they need. We've been quite fortunate in that flexibility, and I think that speaks to the culture that we've been able to build here as well.
I want to just weigh in one last piece there. Some of our clients have had to make those difficult decisions again, where they've had an employee say, "Look, I'm working frontline in building management, and I'm not comfortable coming into work." So, but the requirement of the building to keep it still working and functioning requires multiple people to be on there, and they've had to look at staggering how people can come in. So there's going to be an alteration to your normal workday practice. Some have had to actually offer reduced working hours. And a really key point to when that happens, again, consistent theme for what we talked about, communication and making people understand that if you're going to get reduced working hours now, understand why. And as much as we as a business can do this, that we will tell you how long that's going to be for. We obviously don't have a crystal ball, but I want to make sure that employee comes back to me, right? In this market, as you know, we are talking to so many people right now who've either been displaced out of jobs or have gotten the fear and they're looking for other jobs. And our recommendation is, if you've got a job, you need to hang on to that. If you've had a situation where you've had to take a reduction in hours, understand from your employer why and how long for, because if you believed in it, if you put time into that company beforehand, you're going to want to go back there. And some of the employers out there are fearful that people won't come back, whether if they've had to go to the temporary layoff or that option. And that's something that that I think is important to address from a business standpoint.
Add one more thing to that. From what Michael is saying, there are quite a few individuals that are open to temp opportunities right now that don't be afraid to pull that trigger. Right? If you are finding that need, if again you can't find someone internally, if you need even a 3-month temporary support, organizations like Impact Recruiting can support that and help with that staffing. And I think that's one thing that's going to be a bit more different, that you are going to probably have to pull the trigger on more temporary support in the short term if you don't have someone internally that can take on the work. Because again, going back to the first part of the conversation, people don't have a regular 9-to-5 job anymore. And that includes our frontline workers. They're at home, they're homeschooling, they're taking care of their kids. They are, dealing with all the other joys of their spouses being, around them 24/7 in a lot of cases. So, being able to balance that life is critical. And adding to someone's workload is not really feasible right now. It's how do you actually take away if possible?
So we're going to open up for questions soon, and we've already got a couple there. But before we move into questions from the audience, one thing, Dax, you mentioned while we were prepping for the call was, mental health. And, we're at the point now where people have been working from home anywhere from, 5 to 7 weeks. You talk about the competing demands on people's time. I know for myself, dealing with my own kids and schooling can be challenged to balance it all. How do you support remotely when people are feeling, stressed out and the burden of balancing everything?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I guess the first part is, don't be afraid to ask. And, from a people manager perspective, it's asking open-ended questions. If you ask, how are you doing? You're going to get that one-word answer of good. Right? If you frame it differently, and maybe it's the recruiter in me, that just as naturally goes there. But if you're framing it along the lines of, what's been your greatest challenge this week, right? It gives people the opportunity to be more open and to be, quite frankly, more transparent in how they're truly feeling, and then you can provide that support. And most organizations have access to tools. There's quite a few that are available, but I would encourage that. This is, we're about a week and a half away from Mental Health Week, which is apropos timing. This is the time, to your point, between 5 and 7 weeks that people start to feel differently, and they're not sure why. And it could be because of all the added pressure. It could be just because of the isolation. And I think it's an important conversation that people managers need to have with their teams, or organizations need to have with their people around that mental health, and giving them that support. And sometimes it may be telling them, what, don't be afraid to take your vacation days. Yes, you'd have nowhere to go, but sometimes you just need the break. So instead of balancing 3 things, you're just balancing home, and encouraging people to take that time when they need to.
John?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the mental health is a key thing that we need to look at. The first few weeks we were dealing with getting all the process in place, moving everybody from working from home, how the metrics we're going to use to make sure everyone's doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so we've got most of that all in place now. Now we really need to make sure that we're taking care of our people, because this is going to be a longer haul, and it's not going to be over in the next couple of weeks for sure. It is a challenge. I think that every person working from home, I got 3 kids upstairs, and I have to warn people on a webinar that if you hear zoo sounds, that's okay. I apologize in advance for them, but it is definitely, mental health is a key thing, and I don't think we have it perfectly solved yet, but it's definitely a focus of us on how we make sure our people are doing okay at home.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Michael?
Yeah, key points there. You want to make sure that you're fully understanding of your benefits and you've made sure that all of your employees are. I'm still surprised sometimes how many employees don't really fully know what is available to them in their benefits plans, right? So that's a great thing to start with. And then beyond that, and Sean, this is a good thing that you mentioned here. We're at the beginning of starting to see how people react in their own mental health status. And it's not going to be something, if we all go back to work in some capacity over the next 4 to 6 weeks, probably more different for Ontario than BC, but it's going to go beyond that, right? The knock-on effect and the lag for people to then have to realize you've had to do a giant change to your structure before, you've gotten used to it, and now you're going to have to do a giant change to your structure again. And as we've all said, it is not a normal, it's a new normal. We need to make sure that we're all checked in with the people that we work with closest and bring them to the point of making sure that they also feel comfortable in us as management, as company leaders, to also put their hand up. Um, it's difficult for a manager as well to constantly, every call that you start, we do so many calls now, and you're allotting time at the beginning of those calls to check in. And I think it's fair to say that most people are doing that. But it also weighs on the managers as well. And that's really important. As a manager, you're the sponge for everyone else. And you also have to make sure that if you want to continue to be that clear, patient, present decision maker, you have to look after your own mental health as well as
Yeah,
manager.
Michael, and if I could just very quickly just say, that's a great call out. People managers, we're all human, right? There's no expectation for people managers to be superhuman and to take it all. Put your hand up if you need it. Don't be afraid to do so, because your team needs you, right? Your team needs that support. And for some people, you need to put your hand up and say, you know what, I can't take any more right now.
Yeah, great point. So let's move to Q&As we've been getting in. So one Q&A that's come in is, if your business is running as usual and you had planned salary increases for, sometime in the next few months, love to hear from people. Are you choosing to continue with those salary or contract increases, or have you guys decided to take a more conservative approach?
I can only speak for us. We're taking on a case-by-case basis. I think most organizations are. We all want to be fiscally responsible. If it's the right thing to do, we are moving forward with it. Yeah.
Yep. Same thing. It's that time of the year. Everything kind of hit in that sort of March time, and for a lot of companies out there, that's when bonuses were supposed to be paid out, and sometimes retroactive pay increases. Pay increases from majority of the clients that we work with, we've seen those go through. There are some clients that have had to then readdress it with their staff, very much on an individual basis. They're saying, do we stagger on a bonus, or do we kind of defer to some later point in the year? It still comes down to having open conversation. And there's also a lot of people out there who at a more senior level have put forward their option for saying, will you take a reduction at this point in time? Sure.
We're proceeding as planned, so
Yeah.
we haven't changed it. Again, we haven't been significantly impacted like some industries, and so we're proceeding as we planned.
Great. So I've had two questions that are kind of the flip side of a single coin. On one hand, how do you recognize those team members who are having to work harder or increase their hours or kind of go above and beyond? And at the same time, how do you coach team members who might be having difficulty with productivity or making errors with what they're doing?
Yeah, I think that, go ahead.
Yeah. So this is one of the innovations that we had to come up with, is we have different metrics for measuring things on how we can support our team. But we didn't have a consolidated dashboard for every associate. So we just are completing, it's a program called Power BI, where we're taking all of our different metrics into one place so that when a manager does reach out to one of their reports, they're able to have all their metrics available, so we can see where they need support and where they don't need support. And I think that's just because when you have one-on-one time in person, it's a little easier to ferret that out. But virtually, it's easier if you have the metrics in front of you, so you can check on what the situation and the productivity is.
And then to add to that, I'll do the negative and I'll work on the positive. So on the negative side, for those that need to be motivated or the challenges or the errors, I think number one, you have to identify it is a different work environment for a lot of individuals. Is this something that was happening prior to the situation, or is this just a continuation of it? If it is new because of the situation that they're in, then I think you have to be understanding. I think you have to understand why or what may be causing that, what may be causing the errors. It could be distractions. And maybe it's a conversation around the coaching of, okay, when you're working on this, I need you to focus. Can you block off time early in the morning or later in the day if you're a parent, or are you able to focus, and block off the time, or do you need to have more one-on-one work with me, right, to get through that? Because some people are going to be, as mental health changes or as people start to get distracted more easily by the Netflix or the laundry or everything else that they never had the distractions before. To be re-engaged and be refocused. So I think that's the people manager needs to have that conversation and try to understand, number one, why it's happening, and then put some opportunities in place to solve for it. The individuals that are going over and above the janitorial staff, the cleaning staff, security staff, the health and safety staff, I'll call them the COVID heroes. It's actually well timed for us. We have an awards ceremony that we normally do that we postponed a little bit. But I think some type of recognition goes a long way. It doesn't have to be monetary, it doesn't have to have a cost to it, but I think recognition within the organization is key right now. And I think we should be recognizing them, because there are a lot of those COVID heroes that are up against the front line, that are doing more, that are keeping everyone else safe, that we not so much take for granted these days, but that just need that extra recognition that, we appreciate them.
Yeah. I want to add a couple things to that. So when you're talking to the individuals in your team who may be facing a difficulty in terms of their output or production, it's important for them to understand that as a business, our service, our model, our delivery model is still exactly the same. That's what puts us in business. That's what keeps us going. You take that back down to what has changed in their particular life in the last 6 weeks, and what is their purpose? Is it different from now? That's where your conversation piece starts. Are you viewing things differently now? Do you view your position in the company differently now? If I get an understanding of that, then I can start to work with you on a much more specific one-to-one and more frequent basis, because no one likes to use the word micromanagement. No one likes to be micromanaged. However, what we're asking in this remote world, it's the weirdness of it. You're working remotely, but you actually need to manage in a closer way with everyone that you do manage. That's a challenge to be faced. And then the other part, for anyone that is working frontline, janitorial or otherwise, it's important to know. We always know that there's more than one way to bonus somebody. And that still comes down to understanding what is it that makes that person tick. From a manager's standpoint, it's going to take more of you to find out for each individual. And then you can work out, maybe they don't need, a back-end bonus in 3 months' time, just getting through this point in time. Maybe it is, some more vacation time because they put in the hard work at this point. They put themselves out there. If you can find that out, you're actually knocking down a couple of things at the same time, and you're getting more connected with your workforce.
So what can you say to those managers? Oops, sorry, some feedback there. What can you say to those managers who are used to kind of managing by the whites of the eyes, so to speak? Someone who's, going and talking to their team every day. What words of advice would you have for those kinds of managers in this current environment?
Yeah, for me, it's a great question. I would say it's being able to focus on outcomes. And I said that earlier today, we've got individuals that have been experts in the business for 30, 35 years. And they're used to your point, being able to see the whites of their eyes, sitting down next to that person, walking over and having that direct, observational coaching moment. You can't get that now, right? So I think focusing on the outcomes is key. Having those teams virtually, right? Don't be afraid to have buddies partner up and do work together. But again, it's not the same. It's not the same world, and it won't be the same world after all of this. So looking at how you are measuring someone is going to differ. And that's going to come to, I think Sean's been talking around their metrics, and they figured out how they're, how they're assessing individuals. And that's really it. It's understanding that it's not going to be, okay, I can see you show up at your desk at 9 o'clock. You're a great worker. It's, wow, you're getting this done and you're banging it out and your quality is great and your rate of errors are low or zero. And it's recognizing that aspect of it. It's different.
Yeah, if I can just jump in, I think the key thing with metrics too is identifying where they're struggling, right? And how you can better support them. So if they can't do something working from home, let's figure out a different way of doing it. And I think that's what the metrics are good at identifying is like, if we're hitting all our targets, great. But if we're not hitting it, what's a different approach? How do we work around this to figure it out to get the results?
Michael?
I think you covered both of them. I agree 100% in terms of what was said there.
That's great. We have a question. I'm not sure if you guys are able to answer this or not, but the question is, how do you think project management businesses will react to contract increases at this time?
I won't venture into that one.
That's a difficult one. It could go a different way, right? I mean, I'm not sure if that means contract increases in terms of straight up business cost, or we talking schedule and timeline. That's a tough one. You would still, I would think, factor them both in. That project management timeline increases, the contract and the ability to keep it rolling increases. You'd still have to go back and consult with your financial teams internally and say, well, what is available to us from any government programs that are currently open to us? Because it comes down to cash flow, right? I mean, it's so every single business out there, regardless of what side of the coin you're on, is trying so hard to manage cash flow right now while keeping things as normal as possible. So, a heavy conversation with your finance and accounting teams, and then additionally with your employment lawyer partners out there in the legal world. That's where you want to go to with that.
Yeah, I'd say just to add to what Michael said, I think it comes to that trade-off triangle at the end of the day. If you're increasing costs, can you decrease quality, right? Can you increase the timelines or decrease the timeline, depending on what the project is that you're trying to achieve at the end of the day. So it really comes down to can they increase the cost? Possibly, they may have had that contingency budget set aside for that. To Michael's point, though, most organizations are being very fiscally responsible, and they're looking at how do they streamline costs in this type of economy right now, with the market being what it is. So I think you'd look at what are the two other options. Do you stretch out that timeline, or do you adjust the quality? And it's never an easy conversation to have as a project manager, but it's a conversation that has to happen, and every project manager should be used to having those conversations in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
That's great. Well, I'm conscious of keeping us on schedule, so I wanted to just wrap up and say thank you very much to our panelists, Sean Ingraham from First Service, Dax Sardinha from QuadReal, and Michael Scott from our co-host Impact Recruitment. As mentioned, we'll be hopefully being able to share the recording of this webinar, and Sarah's just going to throw up a thank you screen for everyone to say thanks. We really appreciate you experimenting with us, and we will be continuing to have some more of these webinars over the next coming weeks and months. So thank you to everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and thanks to the panelists and attendees.
thank you. It was a pleasure to be on.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.